Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your weekly deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Rick Spair, and joining me as always is Laura.
Thanks, Rick, and happy Sunday to everyone tuning in. Today we are diving into a story that sits right at the intersection of artificial intelligence, professional sports, and the very human question of who gets to make the call when something happens on the court.
I love that framing, Laura, because basketball is one of those rare cultural touchstones where every single fan watching at home feels like they could referee the game better than the actual professionals getting paid to do it.
Exactly. And the news this week is that NBA Commissioner Adam Silver basically said the league is ready to take a meaningful chunk of those calls away from the human referees and hand them over to an automated AI system on the rafters.
That is a sentence that would have sounded like science fiction even 3 or 4 seasons ago. So walk me through where and when Silver actually made this announcement, because the medium matters as much as the message here.
He said it on Thursday during a long sit-down on the Pat McAfee show, which is itself a perfect detail for 2026, because the commissioner is now breaking infrastructure-level news on a sports podcast instead of through a formal league press release.
The choice of venue is such a sign of the times, but tell our listeners exactly what he said, because the precise framing matters a lot when you are talking about replacing human judgment with software in front of millions of fans.
His exact phrasing was that artificial intelligence will take all of the so-called objective calls out of the hands of the referees, and he described the new experience as both instantaneous and completely automatic with no whistle stoppage required.
Instantaneous is the word that really jumps out at me, Laura, because the current NBA replay center in Secaucus sometimes takes a full minute or more to confirm a single call that everyone in the arena and on television is waiting on.
That is the real product story buried inside this announcement, because the user experience of officiating today is a stoppage, a huddle around a courtside monitor, and a long, awkward delay that absolutely kills the flow of the game for fans.
So how is this actually going to work technically? Because instantaneous and accurate are two words that historically have not shown up in the same sentence very often when we talk about sports officiating technology rollouts across major leagues.
The system is built on top of Sony's Hawkeye Innovations platform, the same three-dimensional optical tracking technology that has been quietly running in NBA arenas since the 2023 season started across every venue in the league.
People know Hawkeye from tennis, where those animated graphics show the ball just barely catching the line. But basketball is a much more chaotic environment for a camera-based system to track every single moving object on the floor.
That is a really sharp observation, Rick, because tennis gives you a flat court, 2 players, and 1 ball, while basketball gives you 10 players, constant physical contact, and a ball that moves in 3 full dimensions almost all of the time.
So what specifically tipped Silver into making this announcement right now? Because the technology has clearly been sitting in arenas for nearly 3 full seasons already without going live for any actual game-changing official decisions.
The proximate cause was a brutal missed out-of-bounds call in Game 5 of the Western Conference Finals between the San Antonio Spurs and the Oklahoma City Thunder earlier this week, and the league actually conceded the error publicly afterwards.
I remember the conversation around that play, and the league issued one of those last 2-minute reports, basically conceding that the referees got the call wrong on a possession-changing moment that absolutely could have swung the entire series.
Right, and when you have a multi-billion-dollar playoff series potentially hinging on a single call that any decent camera angle could have resolved instantly, the political cover to roll out automation suddenly appears almost overnight in a way it never had before.
This feels like a pattern we have seen in other sports too, where one viral missed call ends up accelerating an automation timeline that had been quietly creeping forward inside the league offices for years without much fanfare or public attention.
Exactly the same pattern as the automated ball strike system in Major League Baseball, where decades of bad calls finally hit a tipping point and the technology was suddenly considered ready to ship at the major league level for real games.
So when a fan is sitting in the arena or watching on television, what does this new system actually feel like during a normal trip down the court for a contested possession that ends up bouncing off 2 players near the sideline?
According to Silver, the call simply happens. There is no whistle, no huddle, no stoppage, no quiet referee touching an earpiece for 30 seconds. Just an automated decision that flashes on the Jumbotron and the play continues without any drama at all.
That is honestly a pretty radical change to the rhythm of an NBA game, Laura, because the moments where everyone in the building waits and complains about a contested call are part of the live experience of going to a game right now.
It absolutely is. And I think the deeper question this raises is whether fans actually want to remove that argument time from the sport, because the human drama of officiating is part of why people watch live games in person in the first place.
That is a fascinating point about audience expectations, Laura, but I want to push back a little, because in survey after survey, most fans claim they want the calls right way more than they want the theater of arguing about them later online.
Fair counter, Rick, and the tennis precedent strongly supports your point, because once players stopped being allowed to challenge electronic calls, the sport adapted within a single season, and almost nobody in the tennis world seriously complains about it now.
Let me ask about what specifically gets automated in this very first wave of changes, because Silver was extremely clear in the interview that not everything happening on the basketball court is going to be handed over to the AI on day one.
The first batch is out of bounds in goaltending calls, which are objective in nature because they come down to clean physics questions like where exactly the ball crossed a line or which player on the floor touched it last before it went out.
And what stays with the human referees in this initial deployment, because there is a whole category of subjective basketball calls where AI is just nowhere close to being ready to take the wheel without creating a massive officiating disaster for the league.
Fouls are the big one, Rick, because deciding whether contact rose to the level of a foul depends on context, intent, leverage, and the broader flow of the game in ways that current computer vision models simply cannot judge with any reliability today.
Travel calls are another interesting case because the rule itself is technically objective on paper, but in practice, referees apply it with a lot of nuance based on whether the move felt smooth or jagged inside the rhythm of the play.
Exactly. And that is the broader truth about AI replacing human judgment in any field, which is that the easy objective calls go first, and then the system slowly creeps into more and more subjective territory as the models keep getting better.
I want to ask about the data side of this story, Laura, because nearly 3 full seasons of Hawkeye 3-dimensional tracking data is actually a massive training corpus by any reasonable AI benchmark you could possibly apply to it.
That is exactly the unsung story buried inside this announcement, because Sony has been collecting calibration-grade tracking data on every single NBA possession since 2023, which means the new system is absolutely not learning the rules of basketball from scratch.
That kind of multi-season foundation is what makes the transition feel sudden to fans on the outside, even though the underlying machine learning work has been building patiently in the background of every game for the past 3 full seasons.
It also explains why Silver felt comfortable promising the word instantaneous, because the inference is fast. The hardware is already in place, and the model has been quietly grading every call against what the human referees actually decided in real time.
So in some sense, this AI system has been shadow officiating the entire league for years already. And now they are just turning off the human filter on a specific subset of those decisions and letting the silicon speak directly to the scoreboard.
That is honestly one of the better one-sentence summaries of how AI rollouts actually work in regulated industries, which is shadow mode for years, followed by a single suddenly visible deployment after the operators trust the numbers enough to flip the switch.
Let's zoom out for a moment, Laura, because this announcement is not just a basketball story. It is also a really interesting signal about where automated officiating is heading across professional sports much more broadly than just one league.
Tennis already has full electronic line calling at the major tournaments. Baseball has the automated ball strike system rolling out. Soccer has goal line technology and offside automation. And football has computer chips embedded inside the actual ball itself now.
And what unites all of those examples is that the technology only ever moves in one direction, because once a sport adopts an automated call, the political pressure to expand its scope just keeps growing season after season after season.
Right. And the underlying reason for that is integrity, especially in the legalized sports betting era, where every controversial call is now also a financial event for somebody somewhere who placed a real money wager on the outcome of that exact play.
That gambling angle is actually huge, Laura, because regulators in states with legal sports books are watching league officiating with much more skeptical eyes than they were even 5 years ago when this stuff was still largely operating in the gray market.
Exactly. And AI calls give the leagues a kind of audit trail and consistency story they can hand directly to regulators, which is much harder to produce when contested calls live entirely inside the heads of human officials with no replayable reasoning.
Let's talk about the human side of this for a minute, because there is a referees association inside the NBA, and these are union jobs that are now being partially automated away in public view of a national television audience.
That is a really sensitive piece of this story, Rick, and the framing the league is carefully using is that AI frees the referees to focus on the subjective calls where their hard-earned professional judgment is still absolutely essential to the game.
That framing is similar to what every industry says when AI starts taking over the routine pieces of a job, which is that the humans get to focus on the supposedly higher value work that requires real human intuition and experience.
And sometimes that framing is actually true, but it is also worth saying that referee crews could absolutely shrink over time as more of the workload shifts to the automated system in the background, especially when budgets come up for negotiation.
For me, the more interesting question is whether the players themselves accept the new system, because basketball culture is built around arguing with the referees as a kind of competitive ritual that goes back to the very beginnings of the sport.
That is going to be a real adjustment for players, Rick, because you cannot really work the ref the way veterans have always done when the ref is a camera array on the rafters running an inference model on a Sony server somewhere far away.
I keep coming back to the language Silver used, though, which is that AI takes only the objective calls, because that framing really matters for how comfortable players, coaches, and fans actually feel about this change when the new season tips off.
Yes, and I think the long-term version of this story is a sliding scale, where the league keeps quietly redefining which calls count as objective enough to push over to the eye side as the models keep improving year over year.
That is the slope that everybody worries about with automation in general, where the boundary keeps moving and what was unimaginable 5 years ago becomes routine by next season, without anybody really stopping to ask whether the original line was correct.
Right, and the NBA is going to be a really visible test case for how a sophisticated audience reacts when AI takes over more and more of a culturally important decision-making job that fans have very strong opinions about already.
I want to get your prediction, Laura, because you usually have a strong instinct for how fast these technology rollouts actually go from announcement to broad real-world deployment inside major league sports organizations like the NBA and its broadcast partners.
My read is that Out of Bounds and Goaltending will be live for the start of next season. Fouls stay fully human for at least 3 more years after that, and travel calls are quietly the surprise next domino to fall in line.
That timeline feels aggressive, but also realistic, given that the underlying tracking infrastructure is already deployed in every arena, which is usually the slowest and most expensive part of any officiating technology rollout for any professional sports league in the world.
Exactly. And one detail I find genuinely fascinating, Rick, is that the same Hawkeye platform is now powering automated calls in tennis, cricket, soccer, baseball, and now basketball at the professional level all across the globe simultaneously.
That is wild, Laura, because in just a few years, a single Sony platform will essentially be the silent third referee at almost every major professional sporting event happening anywhere in the world on any given weekend night across multiple continents.
And that quietly creates its own genuinely important AI ecosystem story, Rick, because the entity holding all of that tracking data and all of those models becomes a kind of infrastructure layer for global professional sports going forward into the future.
That is a really good way to land this whole conversation, Laura, because what started as a podcast appearance about a single missed call in Oklahoma City is actually a much larger story about platform consolidation in sports officiating worldwide.
Exactly, Rick. And the takeaway for our listeners is that AI does not always arrive as a flashy new model release with a big launch event. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the background of something you have been watching for many years.
That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.